Hello everyone. Thanks for joining us again on the channel. In today's episode we're talking about the creepiest things people swear they've seen, but have absolutely no proof to back them up. Don't forget to subscribe, and let's explore these mysterious encounters. I remember being 7 to 8, it would have been 1996 or 7. I was vacationing with my grandmother, just me and none of my siblings. It made me feel very special. Anyway, she lived in NC. We spent the day at the beach, and I was just relishing my alone time with my favorite grandma, mostly collecting cool seashells and swimming. I remember, though, that we went out and had dinner by the beach, and by the time we got into the car, it was getting dark. This is where it turns weird. I remember the moon being tremendously big and seeming to be very close. I was staring at it the whole ride back to her place, amazed. I got into my pajamas, and it was time for bed. I was lying in bed and staring out the window at this moon, which seemed to be right at the window. When I say big, I mean taking up a good portion of the horizon. It was so big that I remember not being able to fall asleep easily because of the brightness. I eventually fell asleep looking out at it. I woke up the next morning and everything was normal, and although, through the years, the memory comes and goes, I have never experienced it again. When my mother was little, my grandmother had to go out to work, leaving 5 children alone. My great-aunt lived downstairs, and from time to time she would go and check on them. They lived in a rather dilapidated attic with very steep stairs, not to mention everyone was very nervous. My mother told me that before going out, my grandmother always put them together and murmured a few phrases. She swears that more than 3 times she has gone running down the stairs, tripped, and something grabbed her in the air and gently placed her on the bottom step. She says she was little and was never scared. A few years ago at a family dinner, the conversation came up about inexplicable things that had happened to us, and my funny uncle told exactly the same thing, thinking that none of us were going to believe it. My mother looked at him amazed, as did all my uncles. It turns out that they had all had the same experience, but they had never told him about it, thinking that the others would make fun of him. My grandmother says that she prayed to the guardian angel, but I don't know, this woman always really liked witchcraft. To say that my mother and my maternal family in general are like magnets for paranormal things, glitches. When I was 10 years old, I had gone to my aunt's house for a reunion. They had recently gotten a dog, a beagle, about 1 meter long, and I swear my cousin, who was 1 at the time, had taken off her diaper, threw it around, pooped on the floor, and the dog ate it. It was in the living room, but everyone else was in the kitchen, so I called out to my aunt to tell her what happened, but I couldn't since I was wheezing and gasping for air from laughing so hard. By the time I was able to tell her, and she came over, the dog was laying on the couch, and my cousin was playing with her toys and her diaper on. I was maybe 12 when I had this experience. I was staying up late one night in my mom's bed watching YouTube videos, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone run down the hall to the open bedroom door and make a complete stop. Thinking it was my cousin staying with us from Mexico, I looked up and saw a very tall woman with long brown, wavy hair and a long white dress. She seemed almost as tall as the door, and her face was like a black void. She stood there facing me for maybe 5 seconds, then disintegrated into black particles. I also heard my cousin laugh from another part of the house after that. I was about 6. I woke up in the middle of the night, nothing unusual. I've always had trouble sleeping, and I wanted to call my mom because I was thirsty and I couldn't reach the top shelf where glasses were. Well, I called her, but my voice couldn't come out, just like I was mute. So I got out of bed, and I was heading to her bedroom. There's a spare room in between my bedroom and my parents' room. I was there, and something in my mind suggested I look to my left. There's nothing there, just the room's white wall, and I saw 2 figures. 1 man and 1 woman, both elderly people, were dressed in some 1910s or 1920s clothes, not very elegant. I live in a small town where people used to have cows or grow vegetables and such. I remember that they both had silvery empty eyes, and they were just standing there, watching me as I was watching them back. I stood there and just blinked, turned my head, and went to my mom. I've never told her about it. I still swear I saw a sleigh being pulled through the sky by reindeer on Christmas Eve. Which, of course, is utterly ridiculous now, and it was even when I saw it. I was probably 9 or 10 and definitely old enough to know that Santa didn't exist. We were visiting my aunt, who had terminal cancer, on Christmas Eve, and I was standing outside by the car while my parents said goodbye to my aunt and uncle. I was looking up at the sky, and I saw it. No one else did, of course, and my parents didn't believe me. It was a very emotionally stressful time in our lives, so I've since put it down to my imagination, trying to make things happy, but that doesn't change how real it looked. I have quite a few situations like this. The first one was in Krakow, in like 2012 or so. It was December, the second day of Christmas, December 26th or so. It was night. We were going back home from the visit to my friend and his family. We are going down one street, and ahead of us, like maybe 2 to 3 kilometers or so, behind some MDUs or flats or something, if I could guess, somewhere around Plazo, maybe above Liban Quarry, if I could guess, we see a bright light. We first assumed that this must have been a helicopter or Chinese lantern. But then the object moved like 300 to 500 meters, in like 2 to 3 seconds, diagonally, then abruptly stopped, then moved again left. And it was doing these weird movements for a moment, then went in the eastern direction and disappeared. It was 2012, and the drones weren't that popular. They weren't probably even commercially available, at least in Poland, at that time. So it probably wasn't a drone, and for a helicopter. Well, there was no sound, and even from that distance, we should have been able to at least hear some low tones or something. Not to mention that no plane or helicopter would be able to move like that. I didn't have a smartphone back then. I only had a phone from my mom with numeric keys that recorded videos that were probably like 144p or 240p. You could basically count the number of pixels. The only thing I have is that around 6 to 10 other people saw this same thing. The second one happened in Wisława, Poland. We went on a hike on the hill, on which there was an old wooden chapel, and, like 100 meters further, there was a border with Slovakia. When we were approaching one of the few curves after which there was the chapel, I looked up. And maybe 20 meters from me, I saw something that I could only describe as a person made out of white, bright light. It looked like a person, at least it had an outline of the person, but no facial features, nothing, basically pure light. It went from right to left and then disappeared behind the tree. This time, only I saw this. This happened so quickly that my mom, while being next to me, looked at the ground below her, and before I managed to tell her what I saw, this thing disappeared. And behind that tree, it disappeared. There was a precipice, probably 60 to 100 meters deep. When we finally got to the chapel, and I read what the info box there was saying, my hair stood on my body. It turned out that the chapel was built because some boy, or a few kids, saw some apparition or something, and that chapel was built as a memory of this. The last one happened not so far from where I live. Me and my mom went on a bike ride, and we stopped to rest for a while. I looked in the direction of the lagoon, and there was a weird object in the air, like a metallic sphere around the size of the house or something, that was surrounded by a watery, green-colored sphere. If you remember Stargate and how the portal looked after SG was turned on, that's how the texture of that second sphere looked like. It was around 150 to 200 meters away from us, maybe 80 to 100 meters above the water, standing still and silent. There was no question that this wasn't a drone, helicopter, plane, or anything like this. I thought I was seeing things, so I asked my mom if she was seeing the same thing. She looked up and said she saw the same thing as me. And we drove back home when the object was staying motionless above the water. I had a phone back then, but I left it home because I had to charge it. The same goes for my mom's phone. When we both told this to my father, he accepted it, although he said that too bad we didn't have any photos of it. Meanwhile, my sister thought that I was joking, and when my mom supported what I said, she thought we were both crazy or something. I have a vivid memory of being in my grandparents' big wooden house in Pennsylvania when I was 6. I remember watching VHS tapes in the living room, specifically a VeggieTales Larry Boy tape, and some 80s-style children's animation in black and white, where some kids fell down a well and the other kids cheered. The other memory I have is of opening the basement and seeing an older lady tied to a chair burned to a crisp, laughing or crying maniacally. It freaked me out and gave me a fear for the dark I had for years after. I asked family about these experiences, and apparently the house I vividly remember I never went to. They had sold that house years before I was born. I specifically remember every detail of the house, and when I explained it, it actually shocked my grandparents how accurate I was. They had no recollection of the VHS tape and couldn't tell me what it was. As for the basement, they almost just shut me down and gave me a scared look when I mentioned it. Years later, I found out my great-uncle tied his wife up in a chair in their home and burned the house down, killing her. He did this to not have to get a divorce, and he was never arrested or charged for the murder. It was always deemed an accident. He never admitted it, but how secretive he was about it and how I found out make me sure he did it. I believe that's what I saw. Why I saw it in my grandparents' old house, which I never visited, allegedly, I'll never know. Why I vividly remember being there, I'll never know. This is a silly one, but it has bugged me for 25 plus years. I'm originally from Los Angeles, specifically near the beach in LAX. I worked in downtown LA at the time and would take different routes to work, depending on traffic. I'm always amused by store or company names when I see one that tickles me, i.e., Hello Donuts on Venice Boulevard. I imagine they answer the phone while trying to think of a name for their business, and voila! They'd found their name. LOL. I often took Rodeo Boulevard, now renamed after President Obama, and not to be confused with Rodeo Doctor. This rodeo is pronounced as spelled, not with a fake accent like the one in Beverly Hills. It's a long west-east stretch, and I could usually make good time once I got to it. I don't know which street it was on, but there was a shop on one of the corners down near Western or Vermont that was called, I swear on a stack of Bibles, for whatever that's worth, Yo Stereo Sto. It's literally spelled that way, with the apostrophe at the end of Sto. It always made me laugh, and I'd tell my husband about it from time to time because I thought it was hilarious. I probably drove past it a dozen times. He always looked at me like, okay. Anyway, one day my car was in the shop, and my husband had to drive me to work. I was so excited because now I could show him Yo Stereo Sto. I'm sure you can guess where this is going. When we got to the street, it was on, but it was gone. Nothing remotely like it was in that place. Poof. Vanished. It was hard to tell if the shop itself was empty because it was a little strip of small businesses like a mechanic and a tire shop, and the windows were tinted black where the store had been. I was floored. To this day, I have no idea what happened to that store, and even if it closed, taking that huge sign down wouldn't have happened that fast. I'd have expected it to maybe be covered or something because it was a big sign on a huge metal pole that loomed over the building and was firmly embedded in the asphalt. My husband has always thought I'm joking and carried the joke to my grave, but I swear it was there the week before and mysteriously disappeared for good. I tried looking it up at the time, but the internet wasn't great in the 90s, and there was nothing found. I can't explain it, so if you lived in LA in the 90s and you know what I'm talking about, please hit me up. Otherwise, I just have to live with the fact that no one will ever believe me. I was caught in a freak hurricane/tornado in a part of the world where they do not occur. I was driving and the sky had a weird green color. Then I saw the hose. It looked very far away and I was driving in the general direction of Belgium's coastline, so I thought, wow. Tornado? On the channel? That's strange. And suddenly I couldn't see anything because the rain was literally pouring from the sky like someone emptied a bucket of water on my windshield. Pulled over to the side and nearly missed another car that had the same thought. A few minutes later, it stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I looked around and there were cars stopped all over the highway. Some made it to the emergency lane, most just stopped in the lane they were in at the time. Everyone looked terrified and confused. Not being familiar with windowsies, except from that one movie that had the flying cow, I started driving again. It was the eye of the storm. The second wave hit even more unexpected than the first. When that one passed, I looked behind me and it looked so far away again. Either they move extremely fast, or they look a lot bigger on TV. I stopped telling the story because nobody ever believes me when I tell them. Driving home late one winter night, I stopped to engage the front hubs and to take a leak. I'm standing there painting the snow and watching the sky. It was a clear night, and I was at least 15 miles from the closest street light. I was counting satellites, and a particularly speedy looking unit just disappeared as I was watching. I don't know how long I stood there concentrating on the same spot, but I eventually came back to myself when I realized my wiener was really cold. I thought about that for quite a while. Usually when a satellite passes into the Earth's shadow, its albedo fades relatively gradually, but maybe this one was at a significantly lower altitude where the umbra would be sharper? It was freaky at the time, middle of the night, no moon, miles from anywhere. I got in the truck, turned up Floyd, and continued home. The bike flip. In my small neighborhood, my little brother, 5 years old, went down a steep hill on a small bike very fast, probably not going to make the right-hand corner very well, and a car came up to the corner, hit him dead on, and he flipped over the car and landed on his feet. Obviously, no one was recording this in the 1990s. The funny thing is, I don't ever remember my parents talking to the driver of the car or ever seeing it again. I have no recollection of any meaningful adult reaction after the events. Like the driver was just like, okay, that happened. No one died. We're good. Everyone else was good, and we went on having fun. His parents didn't believe us that he got hit by a car and flipped over it. Just like they didn't believe I broke the shit out of my bike by jumping it off a ramp as far as I did. We were daredevils. My family is Japanese Canadian. When I was a teenager, I remember going through my grandparents' old photo albums from before World War II. Yeah, I had relatives who served in both the Army and Navy. I found going through these old wartime pictures interesting at the time, as some friends and I were really big into playing the board game Axis and Allies. Of course, my German friend and I played the good guys. He had bought a German, wartime, flag, and I, of course, had the IJN naval flag. Anyways, I am absolutely positive. I saw several pictures of Japanese sailors meeting and greeting their German Kriegsmarine, SP, counterparts. As this recollection is over 45 years old, I can't recall if they were on a U-boat or a Japanese ship. Anyways, fast forward many years later, when my grandparents both passed away, and I found the same old album, but no evidence of the pictures anymore. Like they never existed. For a while, I tried to do some research on whether the two groups of sailors had indeed met on occasion, but came up inconclusive. It would have been interesting photos to keep as mementos. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, watching TV. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes, I was lying in bed, like I just woke up from a dream or something. I climbed out of bed and stumbled in the dark for my light switch, but couldn't find it. I walked with my hand on the wall and found a door. I opened it and flipped the light switch in the new room, which was a bathroom. It was a large bathroom with a wide glass shower and black tile. I vividly remember how cold the room was, especially the floor tile, and how it smelled like spicy potpourri. With the light on, I looked at myself in the mirror and froze. It was clearly my face, but it wasn't me. I was a little older, I had a different haircut and different facial hair, and I was ripped. Like a professional athlete cut. I just stared in the mirror, flexing and pinching myself, like, is this real? What is going on? Off to the side, I heard a woman's voice say, my name, are you okay? I blinked while turning my head to the voice, and when I opened my eyes, I was back on the edge of my bed watching TV. I assume it was a weird dream or something, but I'd never had such a vivid experience before or since. I can still recall sights, sounds, feelings, and smells like it was a normal memory. I've had difficulty sleeping for my whole life, and when I was young and portable screens weren't really a thing, I mean, there were Game Boys, but they didn't even have backlights, and the attachable lights didn't work so well. Once it was bedtime and the light was out, I often wasn't ready to sleep. So sometimes I'd walk over to my window and watch in the hope of catching a thunderstorm to entertain myself. That night, it was very clear, and I was looking out at the paltry offering of stars we got in town due to light pollution, and then I noticed a red star in the distance to the northeast that I'd never seen before. As I was trying to figure out what it might be, it suddenly got brighter and bigger, and it felt closer. It then darted rapidly to the left, to the right where it had come from, and then to the left again, paused for a second, and got smaller and darker in a way that felt it was going away before disappearing from sight. It was very fast, and the entire arrive, move, and leave movements happened over the course of a few seconds and did not move in a way any object could. I was too young to articulate to myself that it moved as if it had no weight or momentum to it. It was a very mechanical movement, not organic, but the way it stopped and started moving and the speed with which it did it was incredibly precise and weightless. I was very jarred by it, closed my blinds, and laid down to go to sleep, then, because it felt very wrong and unsettling, though not threatening. Even as an adult, I haven't forgotten it, and nothing I can conceive of would move like that. Even a drone would have had some acceleration and deceleration to it, and of course, those weren't a thing yet, either. As a kid, we had a 2-story house. Enter the front door, and you are met with an entry foyer and the stairs up. My room was the first door on the right of the stairs. Basically, the wall the stairs were built into was my bedroom wall. It had this like a 2-foot section of extra wall you had to walk around to get off the stairs and to my door. I used to hide there and listen to my parents fight. To get to my mom's room, I had to cross the stairs and get to her door. This was the plan of action for any possible nighttime issues a stupid boy might have. I had many. Mainly, I'd hurt myself doing dumb SHT, have a nightmare, or pee the bed until we learned, don't give me watermelon. I digress. One night, I'm in my bunk bed. I remember falling asleep, and I'm suddenly awake, and it is fucking bright. Our lot was on top of a hill, and if someone parked in our driveway and drove a truck, a Jeep, or any tall vehicle, I guess, the headlights would come right through my window. I thought this was what it was, but it didn't make sense. I was on the top bunk, because ballers ball, baby, and I could not see any cars out there at all. The guy who adopted me was abusive. When you deal with that even, maybe especially, as a kid, you start learning how to be quiet, small, and alert. I knew the sounds my house made, and I knew the noise the people in that house made. I knew where the floors creaked, and I knew where you were in the house by the noise. Let's just say that by this time I knew what sounds the renters' feelings made when they were feeling them. I heard noises that weren't my mom or that dude. And I heard voices. Also, not theirs. First, the door slammed open. It used to make a funny noise when it hit the wall because it was loose from all the slamming. It did a weird wobble that you could feel, so loud bangs, door wobbles, and funny noises were followed by voices. Clear as fucking day. The first thought was, damn TV is loud, mom is going to freak out if it wakes her. Followed by why is dude up? Nothing good happened at night if he was awake and she wasn't. Then this new noise confused me more than anything else. It was like a cicada plus a rain stick noise. What's in them? Rain sticks, but they are those sticks you flip over and I don't know, beads or some shit falls through the stick innards, and it makes a sound. You know? But it was deeper. It wasn't cool. It scared me. It scared me enough to risk getting out of bed and potentially waking up two people I would prefer to stay asleep. So I got out of bed and started my crawl to the stairs. I can hear whispers. And I decide I'm going to first look around the corner and down the stairs, and no matter what I see, I'm booking it to mom's door. So I look. Standing at the bottom of my stairs in front of an open front door are two things. One, a roach. The other is a praying mantis. They were both talking, and they definitely both noticed me. I remember the noise they made with their mouths. I remember screaming and wetting myself. My mom did her best, she was out of her room so fast, and I remember my mom yelling at her husband for leaving the door open, but even at the time, I remember telling her it wasn't him and asking how he could have done that when he came out of her room after her. He did a lot of things, but he didn't have anything to do with that door being open. I told them exactly what I saw. I told them repeatedly. I drew them. I wrote about them. I legit cried the last time because they had had enough and eventually didn't want to hear it anymore. But I remember this, too. As much as that man hit me or touched me sexually, as much mean shit he would say, he never said I was making that up. Mom did. He didn't. He also never stopped saying he didn't leave that door open. And I mean, he's a liar, but still, I don't think he did. I may never know what I saw, but I know I saw it. I went to see General Grant in Kings Canyon National Park. I was with my girlfriend, and we were looking up at the tree. A guy was nearby, a hippie-looking dude with a beard and long, dark hair, and he started talking to us. Beautiful, isn't he? It's crazy to think I did this all in 7 days. Laughs, well, 6 days with one to rest. He then looked at us and said, "You've got hair like a raven's wing, and you've got hair like the redwood. See? They're watching you because you're their sister." I had sort of reddish pinkish hair at the time, and my girlfriend had raven-wing black hair. The hippie was pointing at a tree full of ravens. "Well, I've got to go now. See you later, raven sister, redwood sister." He then walked with his mom, a little dumpling lady with plump cheeks and long gray hair with bangs, who waved at us. His mom had a tie-dye shirt like him and a long sky blue skirt. They got into a blue VW bus and drove away. So anyway, that's the day I met Jesus and Mary. This isn't my story, per se, but I was there to witness the ending. My mom told me a story from her childhood. It was the late 50s or early 60s in a small town, and kids often stayed out playing with their friends until dark. She was walking home from her best friend's house and looked over at something that caught her eye under a street lamp. There stood a Native American man in full historical regalia, his hair cut in a mohawk. He didn't look at her or notice her at all, and she said it was almost like a movie character on a screen. He was gone as soon as she blinked, and she ran home totally freaked out. Fast forward, maybe 40 years. I was sitting at the kitchen table talking to my mom and my aunt. Somehow, the subject of ghosts came up. I mumbled something to my mom about the time she saw the man under the streetlight, and my aunt gasped, "You saw him, too?" It seems that they actually saw two different men, as the regalia was different in each case, but both descriptions align with the depictions of historical dress from the tribe that had been in our area. Also, they spotted these disappearing men in almost the exact same spot under very similar circumstances. Neither sister told the other for nearly half a century, as they both felt like people would think they were nuts. I heard a plane flying around my house the other day that sounded like it was experiencing engine failure, so I went outside to look for it. It was the middle of the day, so I had to do the whole squinting thing going out after being inside. I scanned the sky for a while until my eyes landed on something tiny. Tiny in the sense of being very far away. I was looking straight up at this little, tiny speck that was being mixed with those little wiggly things you see in your eyes. The plane came into view, and I looked over to see that it was fine. I looked back up to find the speck again with great struggle. As I'm telling you, it was like looking for an aphid in the sky. I found it again, a shiny little speck. It wasn't a plane, as it was moving way too slowly and was way too high to be a helicopter. It was further than any airline I've seen, and even then, you could see the shape of a plane. This thing, though, just looks like a tiny piece of glitter. It was hard to focus as the eye wigglers got more intense from staring at straight blue, but I forced myself to focus on this tiny speck. What was that? I grew up in upstate New York, in a rural area. When I was a kid, I was in the car with my mom during the summer. We were driving home from somewhere and took the same way we always did, through the hills on the back roads. It was a bright, sunny day, totally normal routine. Except this time, as we came around a curve, I saw somebody working on an electric line. They weren't in a truck or connected to a line of some sort. They were floating in midair in a totally black device that looked like a smaller version of an airboat. I vividly remember the big fan on the back and noting at the time that it must be what was keeping them afloat. I had never seen such a thing and was absolutely amazed, but when I asked my mom about it, she acted like it was totally normal, so I never thought twice about it. It wasn't until years later that I remembered it and thought, what did I see? Sadly, my mother has since passed, so I can't ask her about it, but it confuses the hell out of me to this day. I'm a magnet for paranormal activity. It's happened multiple times, and it has always been witnessed. Once, when I was helping at an elementary school, my best friend and I were stripping the cafeteria floor to put down fresh wax. We were discussing which one of us was going to move the last table. It moved itself 30 feet across the cafeteria and put itself neatly at the end of the row of tables we had lined up against the wall. This happened at the oldest school in our state. Another time we were all at a Civil War era cemetery, and his now ex-wife and I both saw what appeared to be about a 16-year-old boy in a Civil War dress kneeling down next to a gravestone with a rifle slung over his shoulder. My friend from the first story and I were coming home from working at another school. We were in the middle of nowhere, riding in my convertible with the top down, smoking a joint. We were edgy teens, lol. We get off onto a back road, and a giant craft hovers directly above us, about 100 feet up. It was much larger than a helicopter or even a plane. We pulled over and smoked our joint, staring at the belly of this thing. I had no idea what it was. Crazy shit that I would never have believed had I not experienced them firsthand. At the reception at my aunt's house the day of my dad's funeral, I saw my dad alive and uncremated. It was when I was 5, but his funeral has always been my most vivid memory. This was in the 1980s. I saw someone who looked just like my dad smile at me and say hi. And my first thought was, oh, Dad must have had a twin. My second thought was a correction to this one. I was a fucking mess the whole time, obviously, so I have no problem considering the wide range of possible outcomes, including some sort of stress-induced hallucination. I don't know one way or the other. I do remember a few hours before that having lost sight of my other parent and out of habit thinking I'd just look for one or the other, and then realizing the flaw in these thoughts. But as a kid, I always wondered if it had been something supernatural. When I was 13 or 14, I was out playing with a bunch of kids from the neighborhood on a very rare rainy day. At some point, a car with heavily tinted windows slowed down and pulled up near us. The driver then rolled his window down, and I could have sworn that it was my uncle, but I could tell that it wasn't quite him. I really can't describe it other than being the same as those dreams you have where you see a person you know, but there's something wrong with their face that makes you sure that this is someone else masquerading as them. I was sure this person knew who I was because he looked right at me out of everyone there and just waved before rolling up his window and driving away. I even said his nickname in confusion because I couldn't really understand how this person looked so familiar. The uncle in question lived in another country, so there's no way it was him, but somehow this guy knew that I thought he was familiar. A super strange event that I look back on from time to time. I have 3. 1. When I was a kid, there was a knock on the front door. I opened it to find my dad standing there in his worm uniform. He completely ignored me and went upstairs. I followed him, and he disappeared. I went into the living room to find him lying on the couch in normal clothes. He and my mom insisted he'd been in that spot for the past hour. 2. Walking down the street with my cousin. An old car went past and backfired. It was the first time I'd ever heard that noise. I thought it was a gunshot and got a huge fright. I jumped and yelled. My cousin asked what? All I managed to reply was, "It went bang." She was like, "What?" Then, all of a sudden, as though time were replaying itself, the car drove past, going in the same direction again, and backfired. She heard it that time and was like, you just predicted the future." 3 is similar to 2. At school. Some kids are picking on me. A girl said some nasty things directly to my face. Then suddenly, it was like time rewound 30 seconds. I said, word for word, what she was saying to me as she was saying it. She was super freaked out. Since 2 and 3 are weird time jump things, I have a theory that so is number 1. I just saw my dad at a different point in time from the present. My parents had a pet toy poodle when I was a little kid. I watched him open a closed or latching door in our house. I'd seen it happen a few times before that, but he was always on the other side of the door, and I assumed somebody just opened it for him and walked away. One day, I happened to be in the room with him and watched him do it. He kept jumping up toward the doorknob with his front paws outstretched, twisting his whole body once he got near it. It took about a dozen tries, but the little guy actually did it. I was 18 years old, got pissed off about something, and went for a walk at night to cool off. As I was walking through a park, all of a sudden, a human-shaped shadow detached itself from the bushes and ran right past me. It wasn't a person, it was simply flat black, like a shadow, and while it had a human shape, it had no depth. When it passed between me and any light source, the light disappeared as the form passed by. And it didn't have any presence, it didn't disturb the wind as it passed me. It was also completely silent. No footfalls, no sounds of grass being disturbed. It was absolutely creepy. I was stone cold sober and immediately went from being seriously pissed off to terrified. I'm 46 now, and I remember goosebumps raising all over my body. When I was around 5 or 6 years old, I heard someone talking in our backyard. I went to open the door, and it was a completely different reality. I basically assumed the role of a father of 3 kids in the 50s. I experienced so many things a 5-year-old would have had no way of knowing or understanding, but I did, or well, the guy I was living vicariously through did. It lasted so long that I celebrated 3 birthdays in that experience. My mom walked into the living room and saw me just standing there with the door open. I was unresponsive, and she shook me until I came to. In middle or high school, I would be learning things that I had already known about World War II and the general political warfare that was happening in the 1950s. It is still the single most haunting or disturbing thing I have ever experienced. My mom says I used to be an extremely overactive kid, but one day I just changed and became way more mature and laid back. I believe that day was this experience. I would give anything to A, know what happened, and B, why it happened. I went for a hike by myself that day. I usually go on hikes with a friend because the long route can take 3 hours. It's still one of my favorites in LA. Anyway, I was alone, and I got out of my car to start off. The start of it is a bit downhill, which makes the end a tough one because you're walking up an incline, and I'm in my own world, thinking about whatever. And all of a sudden, 2 beautifully sweaty, beefy, golden-haired, shirtless men come running up the last bit and split me as they both run, jog, to the end. And as I lived in LA, you get used to seeing celebrities out in the wild and know not to disturb them. I figured it was a perk of living here. But then it hit me, those were the Hemsworth brothers? And of course it would happen the one time I go by myself, so no one is going to believe me. I once got home from work and put my phone on the coffee table to relax and watch TV, and it flew off the table. I really didn't think much of it, so I picked it up and put it back on the table, only for it to fly off the table 20 minutes later. Still not fazed, I put it back on the coffee table, but I made sure to put it in the middle so it didn't fall off again. About an hour later, I was walking to the bathroom, and my phone once again flew off the coffee table. Now I was kind of skeptical about what was going on. I placed my phone back in the middle of the coffee table and said, if there was something here trying to send me a message, push my phone off the table. My phone sat stagnant for about 15 seconds before it slid across the table onto the floor. Now I was freaked out. My wife had just gotten home, so I told her to come into the room and watch what was happening. I once again put my phone in the middle of the table and said, if something is here, push it off again. 5 seconds later, my phone slid across the table in front of my wife towards the edge. I said, push it onto the floor. My phone immediately slammed onto the floor. My wife got freaked out and walked out of the room and told me to stop fucking with whatever was pushing the phone on the floor. It wasn't the end of the experience, but that was the freakiest part. I was at a bar, Boxcar, in Raleigh, North Carolina, in 2018. It was fairly empty early in the evening. I see a guy at the bar who looks familiar. Longer hair and a beard, medium complexion, he looked Hispanic, and for some reason, I walked near him and said, yo, hey, Jesus pronunciation in Spanish. I don't know why I said that, other than that he looked like what I expected Jesus to look like. He turned, and a sense of calm washed over me. I hadn't even had a drink yet, mind you. He touches my left shoulder in a friendly way and says, "Enjoy yourself, child." I said sure thing and got distracted by the bartender. Relay, he had my drink ready. I look back, and the guys are gone. Here's the thing, at the time, I had a tear in my upper left bicep tendon. Constant minor pain and weakness in the shoulder and bicep. That night, it didn't hurt. I chalk it up to drinking, but it never hurt after that night. Strength was back, and all was well. I told a couple close friends that they thought I was nuts, so I never talked about it to anyone until I came across this. It was in the late 1980s. I was not drunk, high, or otherwise impaired. I had stepped outside my house one night and saw balls of different colored lights hovering very low to the ground. Even if I weren't dumbstruck by seeing this, I couldn't call anyone to say, "Hey, come and look at this." Because it was late and my children and neighbors would have been in bed. It only lasted a few minutes, and they were gone. I've done some internet searches over the years and have never found anything that would explain it, other than spirits or angels and other woo type of stuff. I was around 8 and spending a weekend with my grandparents, along with my cousin. We were in the catalog/customer service area of a mall department store, waiting with our grandmother while our grandfather placed an order for an item not in stock. A tall, elderly man entered the area, dressed in what looked to be mid-19th century clothing, including a top hat. He had a peculiar stride, drawing his knees high, almost a march, and walked past us into an opening we assumed was a small hallway for restrooms. As we waited, he never came back out. Before leaving, we peeked into the small hallway, which only held 3 pay phones, no restrooms, no doorways, or other exits. It was empty. The man had just walked in there and poofed. A few years ago, I asked my cousin if she remembered this, and she does. I've seen some strange things, but this one has always puzzled me. My aunt's neighbor died. She and I were a bit close when I was younger, so she left me some blank journals with art she made and jewelry, and I had trouble holding them because knowing they belonged to the deceased made me anxious. The week after that, I couldn't find the items, and I panicked, so I told my aunt, who swore she was alive, and I saw the neighbor again. Nobody remembers telling me she died. Nobody remembers the journals and jewelry, and I've made myself go crazy at this. That's wild. Something similar happened to me, and it was with a neighbor too. For a long time, in my childhood home, we had a neighbor who was very old. My mom always took care of her, she just spent time with her and looked out for her. Eventually, when she wasn't really able to live on her own anymore, her son brought her to live with his family out on the West Coast. My mom continued to stay in touch with them after the move until my neighbor died just a few months later. But then one day, when I was about 20, probably a year or two after all of that happened, I woke up, and my mom told me that our old neighbor had died. The thing was, I very clearly remembered her dying before, not long after she had moved in with her son. I swore she was already dead. I remembered the neighbor's son calling and telling my mom. I could even remember snippets of their conversation. I remembered how my mom told me, and I remembered that a little while after her death, the neighbor's son wrote a letter to my mom, thanking her for always looking out for his mom, etc. I remembered my mom telling me about the letter, and I responded by saying how nice that was of him. I was 100% positive she was already dead, and I seriously cannot tell you the level of shock when I heard my mom tell me she died as if that hadn't already happened. My mom had no idea what I was talking about. She said maybe I confused her moving with her dying, but that wasn't it. I knew she made it out there with her son and was living there for a while. I just remember that she had died soon after moving in. And it's not like I was a kid to the point where I couldn't really remember things clearly yet. Like I said, I was about 20 years old. People have said maybe I confused her with another neighbor or an old relative or something, but there weren't any others. It was definitely her. Still such a mystery for me. When I was a kid, I spent my summers in Louisiana with my grandparents. On one trip, we all went and stayed with my great-grandmother, 104, at her farm. I was 11 or 12 at the time. It had a cool pond, and there were old abandoned train tracks about 100 yards from the house and a lot of grass. There are no trees in the front. There were not a lot of rooms, so I slept on the couch in the living room. That night there was a thunderstorm, not uncommon, and not being a great sleeper, I just sat on my knees, watching the storm through the big front window. It was inky black. There was no light except for the occasional flashes of light. When the lighting flashed, I could see the whole front yard all the way to the RR tracks. Then it happened. Flash, I saw someone standing next to the tracks. Motionless. Just standing there, facing my direction. It wasn't a tree, as there weren't any trees. I immediately started to freak out a bit and became hyper-focused on that exact spot, waiting for the next flash so I could see what it was. It didn't take long, maybe 20 seconds. Flash, nothing. I must have stayed up another hour, at least, watching the storm, constantly looking for the figure. I got zero sleep that night, and no one believed me the next day.